The public discourse is a calculated distraction. While officials like Vance emphasize Greenland's centrality to missile defense, they are directing your attention to the sky. This is a deliberate misdirection, focusing on a high-cost, symmetric threat from the last century. The kinetic exchange of missiles is the final, loudest act. The real war, the one that guarantees escalation, begins in total silence. The primary vector for a systemic attack is not airborne. It is benthic. According to RUSI analysis, over 97% of global data, the lifeblood of every financial transaction, is transmitted through a handful of undersea fiber optic cables. Severing these is not a feat of military might. It is a low-cost, high-leverage act of economic warfare designed to trigger a global solvency crisis overnight. The second vector is orbital. Satellite blinding is no longer theoretical. China-linked groups are already intensifying attacks on Taiwan's critical infrastructure, a real-world stress test for blinding a nation's digital eyes. The objective is not kinetic destruction, but information denial, dazzling, jamming, and disabling the senses of a military apparatus without firing a shot. This creates the strategic nightmare, the blind Leviathan, a nation-state with unparalleled military power, but its senses are severed. No GPS, no global communications, no financial data. In this state of induced paralysis, protocols like launch on warning are no longer a deterrent. They become a mathematical certainty. A disoriented superpower, facing total systemic collapse, is the single greatest kinetic risk on the planet. A nation-state is a balance sheet. When liabilities exceed assets, it triggers a solvency crisis. This is not merely an economic event. It is a crisis of political legitimacy. The state can no longer meet its core obligations, and its authority begins to dissolve. This internal decay is the primary accelerant for external aggression. The war is not the cause of the crisis. It is the desperate kinetic response to it. Analysts at CSIS document the dynamic within Russia. A combination of systemic economic stagnation and the immense kinetic cost of an unpopular conventional war created a feedback loop. Every tank lost, every dollar spent, deepened the domestic liability. The regime faced a mathematical certainty: continue a symmetrical, high-cost conflict and guarantee a solvency event, leading to internal collapse, a repeat of the Venezuela model where vast oil wealth could not prevent systemic failure. When a declining power's conventional options evaporate, it is forced to pivot. The objective changes from winning on the battlefield to inflicting unacceptable costs on the adversary's system. This is the logic of asymmetry. It is a strategic imperative born from weakness. The motive becomes survival. The war is reframed as an external gambit to prevent an internal default. As seen with China-linked attacks on Taiwan's critical infrastructure, digital warfare offers a low-cost, high-leverage tool to destabilize a stronger opponent. For a state facing a solvency crisis, these are not just tactics. They are the only moves left on the board before reaching for the ultimate asymmetric leverage, a nuclear launch on warning posture. Internal decay is a direct vector to global kinetic risk. The entire calculus of kinetic conflict has been inverted. According to analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the cost-benefit analysis is now terminally broken for conventional powers. A state-of-the-art main battle tank represents a capital expenditure of approximately $5 million. The asymmetric counter is a first-person view drone, a tool that costs $500. This is not a weapon. It is an economic arbitrage instrument. For every asset liquidated, the attacker achieves a 10,000 to 1 return on investment. A nation facing a solvency crisis cannot afford to compete symmetrically. It is mathematically compelled to exploit this leverage. This is the democratization of violence. It signifies the collapse of the state's monopoly on high-consequence kinetic force. The industrial and financial barrier to entry for fielding an air force has evaporated. State-grade lethality is now available with consumer-grade electronics. A declining power, unable to fund its conventional forces, is not disarmed. It is incentivized. It is forced to pivot from expensive platforms to cheap, expendable, and effective swarms. This is not a choice. It is a function of economic gravity. The systemic liability of a legacy military becomes a direct invitation for attrition warfare waged on a budget. The global battlefield is not where you think. It is not fought with carrier groups and tank divisions. The primary vector for modern conflict is the gray zone. Systemically weak nations repurposed as laboratories for asymmetric attack. These regions are not the cause of instability. They are the symptom of a global solvency crisis, deliberately exploited as staging grounds. The kinetic cost of conventional war is prohibitive. Therefore, strategic rivals are mathematically forced to operate through proxies in these collapsing states. This is not a theoretical model. It is active protocol. Security Affairs reports that China-linked groups are intensifying attacks on Taiwan's critical infrastructure. This is a live fire drill, a stress test of digital attrition warfare in a controlled environment. The collapse of a state like Venezuela, which Business Insider documents was once one of the world's richest nations, is not a tragedy. It is the creation of a strategic asset for an adversary. It provides a permissive environment for staging operations within striking distance of the American mainland, a blueprint confirmed by CSIS analysis of foreign military presence in failed states. While adversaries cultivate these external laboratories, they simultaneously probe for internal decay within the target nation. A nation's biological, economic, and digital liabilities are the inbound vectors for attack. The Trump administration's stated war on added sugar under the Maha Reset is a direct acknowledgement of this. As per the announcement, the goal is to reverse the chronic disease crisis fueled by ultra-processed foods. This is not a health initiative. It is a national security directive designed to harden the population, reducing a key systemic liability before it can be leveraged by an external power. The mechanism is irrefutable. A rival power, facing its own internal solvency crisis, avoids the high kinetic cost of open warfare. It instead uses gray zone proxies to launch low-cost, deniable digital and biological attacks against the systemic liabilities of its target. The attacks on Taiwan are the test. The collapse of Venezuela is the template for creating a launchpad. The internal health of America is the attack surface. This strategy culminates in the control of hard assets required for the final phase. As Senator Vance stated, Greenland is central to global missile defense. Control of these choke points is the endgame, preparing the board for a potential launch on warning scenario when asymmetric leverage is no longer sufficient. The launch on warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a mathematical trap set by the physics of time and distance. The protocol dictates that if early warning systems detect an inbound nuclear strike, a nation must launch its own arsenal before those assets are destroyed on the ground. There is no time for committee meetings. It is a pre-authorized, automated response to a specific data trigger. However, the primary vector of attack is no longer purely physical. The systemic liability is now digital. China-linked groups are already running stress tests, intensifying attacks on Taiwan's critical infrastructure. This is not espionage, it is a blueprint. The objective is to establish the capability to blind an adversary at will. According to security analysts at CSIS, Greenland is central to global missile defense. Its early warning radar installations are the eyes of the West. A successful cyber attack targeting these specific nodes creates an immediate and total information blackout. This is the fog of digital war, a deliberately engineered state of maximum uncertainty. The commander in the bunker now faces a zero-sum choice. If the radar screen goes black, is it a system malfunction, or is it a deliberate blinding action preceding a decapitation strike? The protocol has no room for nuance. The absence of data is interpreted as the worst-case data. He is forced to launch out of fear because the kinetic cost of being wrong is non-negotiable. For a nation already weakened by internal decay and facing a solvency crisis, the threshold for this decision is mathematically lower. The perceived cost of launching is survival. The confirmed cost of waiting is annihilation. A cyber attack, therefore, ceases to be a soft power tool. It becomes a direct vector for a global kinetic event. A nation's solvency crisis is a mathematical accelerant for global conflict. As internal decay hollows out a state, like Venezuela, once among the world's richest, its tolerance for kinetic cost evaporates. It is forced to pivot from conventional deterrence to asymmetric leverage. The blueprint is already operational. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS confirm the precedent. China-linked cells are already running systemic, low-cost attacks against Taiwan's critical infrastructure. This is not warfare. It is a live fire stress test. The objective is to map liabilities before a kinetic event. The West is providing its own targeting data. The recent AMEHA initiative, publicly declaring war on the chronic disease crisis fueled by ultra-processed foods, is a broadcast admission of a core biological liability. This is not a signal of reform. It is a vector for attack. An adversary no longer needs to target military assets when the food supply itself is a center of gravity. While strategic attention is fixed on high-cost hardware like the global missile defense architecture anchored in Greenland, the true battle space is degrading from within. An attack on the digital backbone of the U.S. cold chain food supply would directly exploit the newly acknowledged biological weakness, inducing a systemic shock with perfect deniability. The calibration shot is a foregone conclusion. Within the next 10 months, expect a coordinated, non-kinetic failure of refrigeration and logistics controls at a minimum of 3 major U.S. food distribution hubs. It will be publicly attributed to a cascading software update error. It will not be an error. It is a test of launch-on-warning protocols for economic warfare.